Hello everyone, my name's Chris. Welcome to the Peace Before Christmas. Now, if everything's gone to plan, you're watching this on Christmas Eve and it's just before bedtime. That means that ahead of you is the longest sleep of the year. Okay, well it may not actually be the longest sleep. Indeed, for some of you, it might even be one of the shortest. But it'll certainly feel like it's one of the longest because of all the excitement that's been today and all that's to come tomorrow. But the quicker you can get to sleep now, the quicker tomorrow will come. The first thing to do is make sure you're ready for bed. That means you've got your pajamas on, you've turned off all those distractions that'll keep you awake, and the lights are nice and low. Now I've already placed my mince pie for Father Christmas, and of course the carrot for the reindeer, and I've got myself a nice warm glass of hot chocolate too. Somewhere under all this filling anyway. So maybe you could have one of those, or maybe you prefer a nice cold glass of milk. Oh, also, if you don't have it already, you'll need a piece of paper or two and a pair of scissors for the craft. But don't worry, there's still a little time to make sure everything's sorted. And once you're ready, then we'll begin. Okay? Right. You ready? Now, normally, I like to do the Peace Before Christmas in person. So if you're one of the people that I've seen before, then hello again to you. But if I've never even met you before, then I'm glad you could join me this year too. And a big welcome to you. So there's a few things that we do every year here at the Peace Before Christmas, and one of those is to read the letter that Father Christmas sends us. But then I thought about those people that haven't been along before, and I didn't want them to miss out. So this year I thought I'd read some of the previous letters that we've been sent too. Now this first one comes from a few years ago. It was sent to us after I'd written a letter to Father Christmas telling him about all the things we got up to the previous year. Dear Chris and friends, I loved reading your letter about how you gather round on Christmas Eve for a bit of calm before Christmas Day gets loud and busy. I can tell you that up here we hardly get a minute of peace before Christmas, let alone an hour. We're so busy getting all the presents ready with the right names to go to the right people. The other day there was a bit of kerfuffle in the present wrapping department. The elves had just finished wrapping all the presents for the children in Estonia when someone heard a strange noise coming from inside the massive pile of presents. After a lot of checking, the source of the noise was eventually found. It seems that a little girl had asked for a cuddly toy polar bear, and by mistake, one of the elves had wrapped up a real baby polar bear. Could you imagine the shock if the little girl had opened that on Christmas morning? That little polar bear is called Ember, and he's always getting into mischief. I can tell you about him next year, but for now, there's something else I want to tell you about. After the AGEM, that's the Annual General Elf Meeting, where we evaluate our Christmas performance and plan how to do better next year. Well, I was a little tired, but there were still a few things left to do. One of which was to order food for the reindeers. Well, it seems I must have been more tired than I thought, because instead of ordering 50 boxes of carrots, I ordered 500. What was I going to do with all those carrots? Between me and the elves, we managed to eat a lot of them, but after several days of carrot soup, carrot chips, carrot pie, deep-fried carrots, carrots on toast and carrot trifle, we had all had enough. Still, There was another box of carrots left, and we didn't want them to go to waste. So what do you think we did? Well, I'll tell you. We had a snowman making competition. All the elves worked in teams or on their own and made the most elaborate snowmen and women and all sorts of other things that they could think of, all of which used a carrot for a nose. The competition was eventually won by a strange elf called Clive, with his modernist approach depicting the existential worries of a snowman in a world full of melting ice. It was hauntingly beautiful. He was rather pleased with himself until he found out that the prize was all of the remaining carrots. Well, I've talked too long, lots to do up here to get ready for this Christmas. I hope you're all pleased with the presents that you get from me, and I look forward to hearing from you. Father Christmas. Well, that was a nice letter, wasn't it? Now, the only problem is that all that thinking about snowmen makes me feel a little bit cold. But here's something interesting I learned a little while back. Did you know that some of the songs that we sing at this time of year are actually written when it's quite warm outside? In fact, there's one song that we call the Christmas song, and it talks all about snow and frost. But it was actually written in the middle of a hot summer heat wave. The writers thought that if they were focusing on lots of cold things, then they might just be distracted from how hot it was at the time. Apparently, it worked. So I thought that if it works that way around, then maybe it can work the other way around too. So let's think about somewhere in the world that's celebrating Christmas where it's hot. What about Africa, I wonder? Well, the first thing to say is that Africa is very big. It's got more than 50 countries, and each country has its own way of celebrating. And actually, there's lots of different ways in each country too, so we can't cover them all. The other thing to mention is that in some of those countries, the major religion is Islam. So you'd think that Christmas celebrations would be quite small in those countries. But actually, there's a spirit of tolerance. Most people get on together well, and sometimes they even celebrate together too. Now, the most important part to Christians living in Africa are the Christmas services. The ones on the day itself, as well as the midnight mass the night before, and sometimes even a service on Boxing Day too. And many of them can last for several hours at a time, so you can end up spending an awful lot of time in church. It's a great chance to get together and celebrate the meaning of Christmas as a community. And indeed, much of Christmas is all about getting together with friends, family, and neighbours. Often, that means that those people who have moved to the cities return to the villages of their birth or ancestry to celebrate with parents and grandparents. Some of the traditions that take place in various parts of Africa were imported from European countries. So for instance, in Namibia, they have certain aspects of German Christmases that others don't. In Ghana, they have some Portuguese influence on their Christmas celebrations. Other areas are a little bit French or a little bit Dutch. And South Africa takes many of its traditions from the United Kingdom. Now that's not to say there aren't plenty of traditions of their own. Perhaps the biggest difference that you'd see from a European or an American way of celebrating Christmas are the colours, particularly the clothing. Well, we tend to wear lots of layers, usually darker colours, grey and, well, darker grey. Maybe a Christmas jumper, though even then it tends to stick to red or green. Maybe we'd include a bit of white for snow. But of course, in Africa, there is no snow at Christmas. Well, other than on the tops of the mountains. It's summer, so many of the flowers are in bloom. There's fruit, growing on trees and bushes, and people want to be outside, not huddled together inside. And that's reflected in the clothes people wear. You definitely wouldn't want to be wearing lots of layers. So there's thinner clothes, dresses, shirts, that all come in, well, lots of different colours, patterns and designs. The most common present you'll see at Christmas time are some nice new clothes, or at least where people can afford them. In the poorer areas, even the smallest gift is appreciated, soap or tools. But of course, if you've got new clothes, you've got to show them off. And on top of the services, there are plenty of other opportunities. Christmas in many African countries has a party atmosphere. There might be carnivals, parades, lots of music, dancing and activity. In Gambia, for instance, there's a parade that involves lanterns, often in the shape of boats. And in South Africa, there's usually some very impressive lighting displays. It's worth noting, though, that Christmas trees can be a little bit different. You won't see very many pine trees, well, not real ones at least, but you might see a few decorated palm trees or cypress trees. Something you might normally associate with colder places, though, if you're very lucky, you might see a penguin or two. There's a species that lives on the southern African coasts. And that's far more likely to happen if you're spending Christmas Day at the beach. Something that isn't uncommon, especially if you happen to live near one, and especially down south. Now, all over the continent, Christmas dinner is often cooked on a barbecue. But away from southern Africa, Christmas dinner is usually spent in villages with family, though it's not kept to themselves. Indeed, depending on where you're from, it's very common to invite neighbours in to join you or to swap dishes with them to add variety to the meal. All in all, Christmas dinner is not something to be kept to yourself. It's something to be shared. And what of the food? Well, that depends where you're from. For instance, in Ethiopia, you'll probably have a spicy chicken stew. In Ghana, you'll likely include some okra as a meal at some stage. And in western parts of the continent, I'm told it's very important to get the rice just right. All over, one of the more common meats is goat, though the main meat will vary from place to place. Well, that's all apart from Egypt, where Christmas dinner doesn't include any meat at all. In fact, it's entirely vegan. Oh, and one last thing. If you're feeling a little brave, then one traditional food you might have at Christmas is dried or fried insects. I'm told deep-fried caterpillar is rather good, though I can't say I've ever tried one myself. Whew. So with all that talk of hot food, dancing around, and good weather, I hope you feel a bit warmer. Now, how about something to get your fingers moving and warm up a little bit more? Not too much effort though, it is Christmas Eve after all. So for this year's craft, I thought we'd keep it relatively simple. So we're going to be making some snowflakes, something that looks a little bit like one of these or one of these. Now, you might have already made one of these this year. You might have made quite a few. In fact, I'm fairly certain some of you already have. But I thought I'd keep it easy, and all you need to make one is a piece of paper and a pair of scissors. Now, if the scissors you're going to be using are quite sharp, make sure you have someone grown up to help you. And if that grown up has already had a couple of mulled wines, you make sure they're behaving themselves with them too. So, first thing is we're going to need a nice square piece of paper. But like mine, chances are yours are rectangular. So the best way that I found to make it a square is to start with one corner and to fold it over until it's nice and level along the top, just like that. And then you can fold down the line like that. So then you should have a piece of paper that looks like that. And this bit along the top is the bit you need to cut off. Now you can fold it over to give yourself a nice crease to work alongside, but you may find it just as easy just to follow the edge of the piece of paper. And don't worry if you go a little bit over, it'll all work out in the end, don't worry. And there we go. And then don't throw this bit away quite yet, because you might find a use for that later on. So, if you open this up again, you now have, hopefully, a nice square piece of paper with a fold through it. We're going to use that fold a little bit later, and we're going to need a couple of extra folds too. So next thing to do is to fold it the other way, from this corner to that corner. Make sure it's nice and straight. I find it's easier if you crease the corners first, and then you can crease all the way along. If it goes a bit wonky, don't worry, you can readjust it. There we go. That's a little bit better. Still not perfect, but don't worry. It'll all work out in the end. Now, you need a couple more folds in there. Next one is to fold lengthways like that. There we go. Along like that. Looks a bit like an envelope now. And then open it back out again. Now this final one, turn it round and fold it once more. But this time, you don't need to open it back out again. In fact, use the crease that you just made, fold it over like that, and then use this crease that you made earlier to fold it like that. You're with me so far? Let me just double check. So, you should have a square piece of paper with lots of folds in it. You fold it up, you fold it across, and you fold it across again. And there you go. Now, mine's not very neat. You might end up with one that's nice and neat, looking a little bit like this. But I'm not going to cheat, because I can prove that even if yours isn't very neat, you can still make it look great. So I'm going to get rid of that one, and I'm going to go with my imperfect one. So, next stage is to make sure you're holding it the right way around. So you should have an open end at the top with lots of loose sheets and individuals, an open one that side with lots of folds in it, and a closed one on that side. And this top corner you need to snip off about halfway. It's quite a lot of paper to cut off, but that will make it a little bit less square at the end. Now, the next thing you need to do is cut some triangles into it, and you can use any of these edges. And what do I mean by triangles? Well, you could do triangles like this, where you cut one side wonky and one side straight. Or you could do the other side straight and then one side wonky. Or you could do both sides a little bit wonky. There we go. Now, the idea is to try and make it a sort of lattice work with these triangles. Let me see. If I cut up like that, and then across like that. That seems to be working. And then maybe across like that. And then, up like that. Now the great thing about snowflakes, of course, is that they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. In fact, it's often said that no snowflake looks the same as another. So my snowflake will likely look very different to yours. How about a nice shallow triangle on this bit? And don't worry, you can take your time over this. A lot more time than me. The important thing though is just to make sure that you don't slice all the way across. You can see it's starting to take shape, right? Actually going to cut a triangle within a triangle. I've not tried that before, so this might not work. But, well, it's a bit of an adventure, isn't it? Seeing how things turn out. How about a wonky triangle that way and then a wonkier triangle that way? Well, that is starting to look a bit weird. Not at all like a snowflake. But don't worry. I think, I certainly hope, it's going to look good in the end. Just a couple more slices. Maybe if you're feeling adventurous, you could try cutting a slot. So, 2 bits up like that, 2 lines next to each other, and then this is a bit fiddly, so this is for advanced scissor users. Chop a bit off like that. And then just to finish it off, I think I'm going to cut that bit off. Right. So, you've got more time than me, but see, mine looks a bit like that, which I agree doesn't look much like a snowflake. Now, hopefully, if we unfold it very carefully, then we will end up with something rather beautiful. I don't think that's bad, you know. I think that looks a lot like a snowflake. What do you think? Now, as I said earlier, don't necessarily throw this bit away, because you can actually make smaller snowflakes with this one. All you have to do is do the same as you did at the start. Fold over the corner and then chop off all that extra bit. And actually, you could probably make another one with that bit. And then repeat the process, but on a much smaller scale. So, fold that over and open it up. Fold in half that way and open it up. Then finally, fold in half that way and then keep it folded, fold across, and then use the crease to create a tiny little triangle. And when you've got a tiny little piece of paper to use, well, you need to make tiny little snips and tiny little triangles. Well, don't have time to finish this one, but you can see what I mean. And I'll show you some of the results you can get with the smaller triangles. You might end up with something like this, or something like this, much smaller ones. And you could even go even smaller. I haven't tried that. That sounds way too advanced for me. But maybe you're better at this sort of thing than me. Oh dear. Do seem to make a little bit of a mess though. Oh dear. Oh. Well, maybe I'll get on with the next thing then. Well, while you're finishing that off and tidying up, how about I read the next letter from Father Christmas? After the last one, I sent a letter back asking if Clive ever finished all those carrots, amongst a few other things, and here's the letter I received the following year. Hello again, Chris and friends. It was good to hear from you again. In answer to your question, yes, Clive the Elf did eventually finish eating all the carrots he won, although it took him until the end of January. By the way, did you know that if you eat enough carrots in a short enough space of time, then you can turn orange? Well, Clive does now. It took him almost a week to return to his regular shade. From year to year, we notice an increase in popularity for particular toys and games. This year has been no exception, though one thing that there was a rather unexpectedly large demand for was slime. It's not something we're usually set up to produce, certainly not in the large quantities required. So we had to use some machinery normally used for producing marshmallow fluff to keep up with demand. Well, it turns out that slime is a very different consistency to marshmallow fluff, and it keeps blocking up the pipes and gunking up the gears. Junior Elf engineer Felicity has been tasked with keeping everything moving, and it has resulted in her being covered head to toe in every conceivable shade of goo imaginable on multiple occasions. That's not the only problem we've had either. Remember I mentioned the polar bear cub Ember? Well, he's been up to mischief again. I should probably take a moment to explain that polar bears age differently at the North Pole, so he'll be a cub for a few more years to come and will likely continue to cause chaos. We have Christmas trees all year round at the North Pole, but once in a while they need sprucing up a little, if you'll pardon the pun. So I tasked Ember with tidying up the tinsel and making sure the stars on top were sparkling. I thought that, if nothing else, it would keep him out of trouble for a while. How wrong I was. The first two trees seemed to go quite well, aside from the occasional growl from Ember pricking his paws on the pine needles. After that, though, everything went quiet for a while. That should have been my first clue that something was going on. It seems that Ember had got bored with fixing up the smaller trees and decided to tackle the big one in the middle of the town square all by himself. He's not short on bravery and managed to climb all the way to the top to get to the star. Unfortunately, he had underestimated his own weight, and you can imagine what happened next. The whole tree started to bend to one side, and then the top part of it snapped off and crashed together with the cub through the roof of one of the workshops. Ember was completely unharmed as he landed on a pile of tinsel, but if you happen to find a stray bauble or a pine cone in one of your presents, then that may well be where it came from. Well, after fixing the hole in the roof and trying our best to make the big Christmas tree look a little better, we're a bit behind schedule, but don't worry, we should get all the presents ready for delivery in time. By the way, if you happen to have any ideas how to keep a bear cub occupied, please let me know, and I hope to hear from you next year. Father Christmas. Oh dear. Well, it does seem that Ember causes an awful lot of trouble, doesn't he? And there's more coming a bit later too. For now, though, I want you to take a look around you at some of the decorations you have up. Which would you say is your favourite? Maybe it's the baubles, the Christmas flowers, the tinsel, the Christmas tree lights. Maybe it's just the Christmas tree itself. Now, in previous years, during the Peace Before Christmas, we've made many decorations of our own. And last year, we made this one. It's called a himmeli, and it's a traditional decoration you might find at this time of year in homes in Finland. So this year, I thought it might be nice to take a look at some of the other traditional things that they do at Christmas in Finland. So the first thing is that in Finland, Christmas is called joulu. And the traditional way of saying Merry Christmas is hyvää joulua. I think, at least. I have asked some Finnish friends for some help, but my apologies if I get the words slightly wrong. You'll also find that the word joulu goes at the start of many Finnish words to show that it's Christmas related or a Christmas version of something. For instance, while Finnish people go to the sauna all year round, that's a wooden room filled with lots of steam to make it very hot. When it's done at Christmas time, it's called the joulusauna. You'll also notice a lot of the foods eaten at this time of year begin in the same way. First of all, there's the joulutortu, or Christmas tarts, which are star-shaped pastries with plum jam in the middle. They sound lovely, and they're a bit like the Finnish equivalent of mince pies, eaten whenever the mood strikes, but always in moderation. Then there's the jouluporu, which translates as Christmas porridge. But what do you think it's made from? Well, it's what we might call rice pudding. It's traditionally made in a big pot with one almond in it. And if you get the bowl with the almond in it, then you're said to have good luck, and sometimes even an extra present. Though don't tell anyone, but I am told that sometimes parents will put an extra few almonds in, just so no one ever feels left out. Now, the traditional drink at this time of year is a must-have, and it's called glögi. It's an alcoholic or non-alcoholic Christmas mulled wine, and I'm told it goes very well with some gingerbread. Now, what about the main Christmas dinner? The centerpiece is called the joulukinku, which is a Christmas ham. Usually it's smothered in mustard and then coated in breadcrumbs. Now, with it is usually served a casserole made with swede and other root vegetables, and it's called a joululaatikot. There's also usually a beetroot and potato salad called rossoli. And then there can be other dishes added to the meal, usually more vegetables and often fish, either smoked or pickled. Now, moving on from food, there's plenty of events too, like the Tiernapoyat, which roughly translates as star singers. Now, this started out as a tradition of groups of boys dressing as wise men and going from door to door carrying a stick with a star on the end. Usually they sang and asked for money. Today, though, that's a lot less common, usually because it's quite cold out, and often events are put on in towns by the same name, usually singing some of those traditional songs sung by the boys. One other official event that might seem very relevant to what we're doing tonight is called the Declaration of Christmas Peace. This is something that most traditionally happens in the Finnish city of Turku, every year on the 24th of December at precisely 12 midday. It's something that's been done almost every year for around 700 years. There's a big ceremony, a brass band plays, and then a very important person comes onto a balcony and reads aloud the Declaration of Christmas Peace. Though it turns out that it's perhaps not the sort of peace we might like. Because what it says is to declare that anybody who misbehaves and breaks the peace on Christmas Day itself will get an even harsher punishment than normal. Now that's something to bear in mind if you're thinking of throwing a tantrum about not getting that present you wanted. Now, one final tradition that might seem a little strange to us is to remember those people that won't be with you this Christmas. And to do that, people go to graveyards and put candles and other lights by the graves of friends and families. When the graves are lit up, the yard is surrounded by trees and draped in a healthy dose of snow. I'm told it's very beautiful and rather calming, and probably closer to the sort of peace we're thinking about this evening than that declaration I mentioned. Now, one place that I suspect there isn't much peace though is Santa's workshop, and judging by the next letter I received from Father Christmas, you can probably guess the source. That's despite some of the suggestions that I sent to him the following year. Hello once more, Chris and friends. Thank you for your suggestions on how to keep Ember busy and out of mischief. Unfortunately, it seems that little polar bear cub is capable of making even the simplest task seem complicated. Per one of your suggestions, I decided to try putting him in the wrapping paper design department alongside Clive. Now, I've mentioned that Clive is a bit of an artist. Indeed, he considers every sheet of wrapping paper to be a work of art. Well, I had thought that having some experience in decorating trees, Ember might have some artistic flair. But when it comes to nice, neat patterns, it seems I was mistaken. Not that he lacks in enthusiasm. Clive rejected Ember's first 32 attempts at creating a suitable pattern, with reasons ranging from reindeer are only supposed to have 4 legs, to snowmen shouldn't be purple with wings. Eventually, Clive accepted one of Ember's designs, a simple paw print, though no one's quite sure whether this one was made on purpose, or if Ember had simply put his paw in paint by mistake. Whatever the reason, the next stage was to put it into a printing machine that would repeat the pattern many times and create the wrapping paper. So, what happened next is a bit of a mystery. What is known is that Ember tickled his nose with a paintbrush and it made him sneeze and bump into Clive. What no one can quite figure out though is how Clive then ended up trapped inside the printing machine. Don't worry, he was perfectly fine, but unable to get out. Eventually, it was junior elf engineer Felicity to the rescue. She had that machine opened up and Clive freed in no time at all. In fact, because of that, and all her other hard work, Felicity has now been promoted from junior to a fully fledged elf engineer. Clive was, as I'm sure you can guess, very happy to be free, and the two elves have been spending a lot of time together ever since. As for Ember, it would seem wrapping paper design is not for him. So I tried him in the present wrapping department. Now, that was a bad decision from me. It was entirely my own fault. I should have guessed what the outcome would be. Polar bear paws are not made for wrapping presents. They can't work scissors, and they especially can't use sticky tape. A well-trained elf can wrap 3 presents in a minute. A badly trained polar bear cub didn't even manage 1 in an hour. Oh, incidentally, if you do happen to find any clumps of white fur attached to any presents you have, my apologies. I'm going to have to keep looking for a good way to keep Ember out of trouble. Maybe he'll have luck in the North Pole Games this year. They happen every 10 years, and all the elves and other creatures at the North Pole get together and compete in various events. Even the goblins get invited, though they do tend to cheat an awful lot. Here's hoping everything runs smoothly, and I also hope everything goes well for you this year. Father Christmas. Well, that was last year's letter, and I have to say, I'm eager to read this year's, but not quite yet. Before that, let me ask you another question. What sort of animals do you think about at this time of year? Maybe it's a reindeer. Maybe it's a polar bear. Maybe it's a robin. Maybe it's just the cat playing with some wrapping paper, or the dog wearing a new coat to keep warm. I'm guessing none of you said a water vole, though. In fact, some of you may have never even heard of a water vole before. Well, it's a small, brown, furry rodent that lives in holes on the banks of rivers and streams. It's sometimes mistaken for a rat, but you can normally tell the difference because it has a stubby little tail and a shorter nose with chubby cheeks. Now, there used to be lots of them living in waterways, but these days they're a little rare and you'd be lucky to see one in the wild. So then, you may be wondering what a creature like that has to do with winter time. Is there something special they do that others don't? Some amazing skill that they have? Well, I've got a story about a vole, and it's less about something they do, and more about something they don't do. This story is called The Winter Winner. By the side of a small stream, near the outskirts of a town, lives Vicky the water vole, with her younger brothers and her mum and dad. Vicky very much enjoyed playing with her friends on the stream and in the gardens, and was always sad when she had to return home. During the spring, she had made lots of friends, but her best friends had become Scotty the song thrush, Gary the grass snake, Donna the dormouse, and Tulisa the toad. They enjoyed playing all sorts of games together, and they also liked to compete against each other in lots of different ways. And as the summer arrived, there would be lots of events that took place. The first event was the singing competition. Now Vicky had been tuning her voice for several weeks in anticipation, and when it was her turn, she squeaked the finest tune a vole ever did squeak. All the judges were very impressed. However, she had to settle for second place to Scotty the song thrush, who, as the name suggests, could outsing just about any other animal, even on a bad day. Vicky was a little disappointed, but she knew there were still many more games to come. A little later in the year, the next competition was hide and seek. Vicky stormed through the first few rounds and made it to the final, but she knew she'd have tough competition against Gary the grass snake. He had a big advantage in being able to sense body heat. Vicky had a plan though, and covered herself in mud to keep herself as cool as possible. And it worked. It took Gary twice as long to find her as it had anyone else, so she thought she had a chance at victory. Unfortunately, when it was her time to seek, Gary was just too good at camouflage for her to beat his time. So again, Vicky had to settle for second place. Later in the year, it was time for the obstacle course. Now, normally water voles aren't as good at climbing as other creatures, so Vicky put in a lot of extra practice. But even then, despite her best efforts, Donna the dormouse was just too agile, and again Vicky was pushed down into second place. As summer became autumn, the competitions continued. But no matter how hard she tried, Vicky just couldn't take first place. She began to get rather irritated by it. The final competition was the swimming race, though, and as a water vole, this was her favourite event. The competitors lined up at the start and got ready. Then, when Scotty chirped the signal, they were off. Vicky paddled hard, but tried not to get too excited and wear herself out too early. She knew this was about endurance, not just speed, so she focused her breathing and kept a nice, streamlined form. As they came into the last straight, Gary the grass snake was still ahead of her, but she was catching up fast. A few meters before the end, she managed to overtake him, and the finish line was just in sight. Just then, though, from below the water's surface, Tulisa the toad popped up ahead of Vicky, just in time to cross the line in first place. Vicky crossed only a fraction later, but it was too late, second place again. Vicky was tired and frustrated. It had been a long race, and this had been her big chance to finally win, until it was snatched away at the very last moment. Unfortunately, she let her anger get the better of her, and squeaked at the other animals, "I wish you would all go away so that I could win." In fact, Vicky was so upset that she didn't speak to any of her friends for 2 whole days. And even once she'd calmed down and decided to meet up with them, she decided she wasn't going to say sorry for what she'd done. Strangely, though, when she went to her usual meeting spot, the other creatures didn't even seem to notice her arriving. In fact, they all seemed distracted by something else and quite sad about it. Vicky listened in and realised that the others were all busy saying goodbye to Scotty. She'd forgotten how late in the year it was, and she remembered that it was time for many of the birds to head south for the winter. Vicky was sad to see him go and joined in with the others as they wished him well. She said she would miss him every day and wondered if he could just stay a little bit longer. But soon his parents chirped and it was time to go. Off he flew for a warmer climate. Everyone was sad. It felt quiet without Scotty to sing them a tune and perk them up. But that gave Vicky a thought. "How about we have a singing competition to cheer ourselves up?" she asked. The others agreed. And it worked. They all felt a little bit better afterwards, especially Vicky. Without Scotty there, she was finally able to take first place. At last, she thought to herself, and had a rather smug grin on her face all week. The next week, though, there was more sadness. The days were getting shorter, and the weather colder. That meant it was time for Gary the grass snake to go into hibernation. So they all played together for one more day, but they knew the next one he wouldn't be joining them, and sure enough, he didn't. Again, the remaining creatures felt rather low. They kept expecting Gary to jump out of hiding like he usually did. But again, that gave Vicky an idea. "How about a game of hide and seek?" she asked. The others agreed, thinking it would cheer them up, and once again it did. And once again, it was Vicky who took first place, which made her very happy indeed. All through the game, though, Donna the Dormouse seemed distracted, and they all knew why. Sure enough, over the next few days, the finishing touches were put to her spot in a tree root, and it was time for Donna to hibernate too. So once more, they spent one more day together, and the next one, she didn't come out to play. Vicky wasn't going to waste this opportunity, though. "How about an obstacle course?" she asked. Tulisa the toad agreed begrudgingly, probably because she knew how it would turn out, and sure enough, Vicky took first place easily. Vicky was very pleased with herself indeed. In return, Tulisa suggested a swimming race, which made Vicky stop and think. Even though it was her favourite event, she knew she probably still couldn't beat the toad. But then she had a thought and said, "I'm feeling a little tired right now. Maybe a bit later." Well, a week later, it was even colder. There was even a little snow in the air, and the edges of Tulisa's pond had begun to freeze. Vicky knew what this meant. They met up one more time and played together once more before they said goodbye for the rest of the winter. The next day, the top of the pond had frozen over completely, and Vicky knew that Tulisa was safe, asleep at the bottom of it. It felt good to know she would be safe down there, and Vicky had a smile on her face for another reason too. Though the pond was still frozen, the stream flowed, and now was her chance to win her favourite event. She ran down to the starting line and then stopped. There was no one left to compete against. There wasn't even anyone to start the race. Reluctantly, she went back home and tried to convince her brothers to play outside. But it was too cold out there, and they were quite happy inside. She even tried to convince her mum and dad to play outside, but they said it was safest to stay inside for now. Vicky didn't want to be stuck inside and tried playing outside by herself for a while. She made a snowball and tried to have a snowball fight, but it just wasn't the same by herself, and she got cold quickly. By the end of the day, she was sat inside, looking out on the world and feeling rather sorry for herself. While water voles don't hibernate, they do spend most of the winter in their burrows, and so it was for Vicky. She was stuck there with her brothers who, like most brothers, were really annoying. Her mum told Vicky not to be sad, that spring wasn't so very far away. Her dad tried to keep her occupied with activities and games, but it just wasn't the same, and she wished for the day when she could see her friends again. The days went on, and she ticked each one off the calendar. Spring certainly didn't feel like it was coming. In fact, it only seemed to be getting colder and darker every day. But then, finally, what seemed like an age later, the weather began to change. It got a little warmer and a little lighter, and that made Vicky feel a little better. The next week it was warmer still, and when her parents finally said it was time, and when it was safe, she rushed outside. The pond was beginning to melt, green shoots were appearing in the ground, and the sounds of birds began in the air. She smiled to herself, though she knew it would still be a little while longer. She could almost feel her friends on their way to see her. And sure enough, a few weeks later, they were all together again. Tulisa hopped out of the pond. Donna woke up from her tree root. Gary slithered out from under a rock, and Scotty flew back down to earth. They were so excited to see each other again, and they shared stories, ate meals together, played games, and even had some competitions. But this time, even though she tried her very best, Vicky didn't care quite so much if she won or not. She was just glad to be able to share it all with her friends. Poor Vicky, stuck inside for all that time. And I think we can probably all sympathise at least a little bit. I'm sure this year there's been times when you've been stuck inside as well. whether it was because of the weather or something else. And I'm sure what you really wanted to do was go outside and play with friends, but you just couldn't. We must remember, though, that though it might feel a long way off, spring is on its way. Things will get better. We will see our friends again. And maybe, because of what we've gone through, it will help us to appreciate them just a little bit more. Oh, which reminds me, I wonder how Father Christmas has been getting on this year. It's time for this year's letter, so I guess we'll find out. Greetings, Chris and friends. I hope you're enjoying this Christmas time, even if it's a little different to normal. The good news is that with the Peace Before Christmas being available on the internet, I might have a chance to watch it this year. Probably while I'm making the long flight over the Atlantic Ocean later on. I just hope it doesn't make me too sleepy. Now, I've been asked by several people if everything's going to be safe this year, and I'm pleased to say that it turns out that elves are immune to this nasty virus, and since I'm part elf, I'm safe too. That doesn't mean I'm not being careful though. I'm taking a big tub of hand gel on the sleigh with me, and if you do happen to catch sight of me, you'll see I'm wearing a mask, and you'll know why. Fortunately, I've always been very good at social distancing, especially on Christmas Eve, so there's no need to worry there. Unfortunately though, for everyone's safety, the North Pole Games had to be postponed this year. Hopefully we'll be able to do it next year, but we're not totally sure. Either way, the goblins didn't take the news well. It took a long time to convince them that it really wasn't happening. They aren't the most intelligent of creatures, and the ones that did seem to understand what I was telling them thought it was just a trick to keep them from taking part. Even once I thought they'd finally got the message, on the day the games were originally scheduled to start, a big mob of them formed up out near the stadium. Well, when they finally realised nothing was going to happen, they got really annoyed and started vandalising the place, horrible little creatures that they are. Something needed to be done about them, so I sent a team out to deal with it. First up was Ember. Goblins are scared of bears, even the small ones. So when he went charging and roaring at them, they scattered. Now, I knew it wouldn't keep them away for long, but fortunately, he was just the distraction. Next up was Clive and his amazing snowman skills. He set up the scariest looking snowman he could dream up, and when Ember got tired of chasing them, the goblins returned to find a small army of snow guards. Now, goblins might not be very smart, but they know a snowman isn't real, and didn't seem afraid of what was set before them. Nonetheless, Clive declared that unless they went away, he'd bring his army to life. Well, the goblins didn't believe him, and they just laughed at him. But what they didn't know is that elf engineer Felicity had been busy too. With the flip of a switch, all the snowmen started waving their arms around and making noises. The goblins were, as I'm sure you can guess, shocked, and immediately ran back to their caves and haven't been bothering us since. Well, that's one problem dealt with at least. Though, unfortunately, now that Ember's realised that he can be scary, he's been making even more of a mischief of himself than normal by hiding around the workshop and jumping out at unsuspecting elves. Still, that's a problem for another time. Christmas is almost here, and there's still preparations to be made. I hope you all have a good time this year. Father Christmas. Well, looks like Father Christmas has been having trouble of his own this year. I really don't know how he finds time to get everything done. Speaking of which, we're almost out of time ourselves. And, well, my hot chocolate's gone a bit cold. There's just one more traditional thing left to do. I like to finish every piece before Christmas by reading a poem. It's a very famous one, especially at this time of year, and it's attributed to a man named Clement Clarke Moore. It's called A Visit from St. Nicholas, though you might know it better by the first line of the poem. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver, so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I hope you enjoyed it. I also hope you feel nice and sleepy now. Ooh, I know I do. Time for bed for me. Just one final chance for me to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye bye.